As you step into 2026, there's a stirring in your spirit that refuses to be silent. You've walked through seasons that stretched you, tested you, and humbled you. There were moments you didn't understand, valleys you didn't expect, and prayers you weren't sure God even heard. But you're still here. And being here means God is not finished with you. This is the year you stop trying to control every outcome and instead trust God to lead you forward. Not because you can see the full picture, but because you know the one who holds it. This is the year you release the weight you were never meant to carry and step into the future God has already prepared for you. Trusting God means moving forward even when you don't have all the answers. If you wait until life makes perfect sense, you will stay stuck in the same place year after year, replaying the same worries, the same doubts, the same internal conversations that keep you bound. There comes a time when you have to recognize that faith isn't built on clarity, it's built on confidence in God. You don't move because you see the whole way. You move because you trust the one who is leading you. There will be seasons where God gives you just enough light for the next step and nothing more. Not because he is trying to frustrate you, but because he is trying to teach you how to depend on him instead of your own understanding. There are prayers you have prayed where you wanted God to respond with a full blueprint, a detailed plan, and a guaranteed outcome. But instead, he gave you a nudge, a whisper, a sense of direction, something small that didn't feel big enough to hold the weight of your future. And yet, that small instruction carried power. Trust requires humility. It requires you to admit that you don't know everything, you can't predict everything, and you don't have to. It shifts the pressure off of you and places it back where it belongs, on God. When you step forward in trust, you are declaring that you believe God is good even when life is uncertain. You are declaring that God is faithful even when the path isn't clear. You are declaring that obedience is better than comfort. There will always be reasons to hesitate. You may fear failing. You may fear being misunderstood. You may fear losing what is familiar, but what if the thing you're afraid of losing was only meant to be temporary in the first place? What if comfort is the very thing blocking you from growth? Trust doesn't mean you won't feel afraid. It means you move while you're afraid because your faith outweighs your fear. It means you choose to silence the inner critic that keeps asking, but what if it doesn't work? And instead ask, but what if God shows up like he always has? When you look back over your life, you will see moments where you didn't know how things would work out, but they did. Not because you were in control, but because God was. Walking forward without all the answers also protects you from idolizing certainty. If you always needed full clarity, you would worship the plan instead of the planner. God invites you into a relationship built on trust, not transactions. He invites you to lean into his character rather than your own capacity. He invites you to step out not because the ground is guaranteed to be steady, but because his hand is guaranteed to be steady. Sometimes the clarity you are waiting for is on the other side of movement. Revelation often meets obedience in motion. When you take one step, God reveals the next. When you sit still out of fear, everything feels foggy. The fog doesn't always lift before you move. Many times it lifts because you moved. This year, trusting God to lead you forward may look like releasing control. It may look like forgiving someone who hurt you. It may look like starting something new or closing a chapter that no longer serves your growth. It may look like choosing peace over anxiety, faith over fear, surrender over striving. Whatever it looks like, understand this. You were never expected to navigate life alone. God didn't ask you to have all the answers. He asked you to trust that he does. And when you trust him, you position your life to experience what only he can do through a surrendered heart. Growth requires leaving behind what is familiar but no longer aligned with your purpose. There are seasons in life where what once felt right, safe, and comfortable begins to feel tight, limiting, and out of place. It's not that those places, relationships, habits, or mindsets were wrong. Many of them served you for a time. They sheltered you, taught you, strengthened you, and sustained you. But there comes a point where the space you once thrived in becomes too small for who you are becoming. And when that happens, God begins to nudge you out of the familiar so he can position you for what's next. Familiarity is powerful because it feels safe. You know the rhythms. You understand the expectations. You've learned how to survive there, but survival is not the same as purpose. Sometimes the very things that make you feel secure are the same things that silently hinder your growth. You can become so attached to what is known that you resist the very change God is using to elevate you. Growth requires discomfort. It requires stretching. It requires stepping into uncertainty without the cushion of everything you once depended on. When God is developing you, he will often separate you from what no longer aligns with your assignment, even if it once felt essential to your identity. There may be relationships that no longer nurture who you are becoming. Conversations that used to energize you may now drain you. Environments that once inspired you may now frustrate your spirit. This is not a sign of failure, but transformation. When your mindset evolves, your atmosphere must evolve with it. God will begin to reveal the misalignment between your current surroundings and your future calling, not to punish you, but to free you. You cannot cling to what is safe and still reach for what is divine. Growth forces you to choose. Will you stay where it's comfortable, or will you follow God into the unknown? Leaving the familiar is rarely easy. It can feel like loss. You may grieve what you once loved. Even if you know it's time to move forward, you may question whether you're making the right decision. You may fear disappointing others. But staying stuck in a season that no longer fits you is far more costly than walking away from it. When you refuse to move, you stunt your own development. You limit your exposure to new opportunities, new perspectives, and new blessings. You confine yourself to a chapter God has already finished writing. Growth invites you to honor what was while releasing your grip on it. Sometimes the familiar isn't an external environment, but an internal mindset. You may need to leave behind negative self-talk, fear-based thinking, people-pleasing habits, or survival patterns that once helped you cope but now hinder your progress. You may have built walls to protect yourself from pain, but those same walls can also block love, connection, and purpose. Growth requires honesty. It asks you to confront the parts of yourself you've avoided. It invites you to heal instead of hiding. As you evolve, old ways of thinking will no longer satisfy you because God is renewing your mind to match your destiny. When God calls you forward, he doesn't always explain everything in advance. You may not fully understand why certain doors close or why certain connections fade. But trust that there is purpose in every shift. Some doors close because you've outgrown the room. Some people fall away because their role in your story is complete. Some opportunities end because God is making space for something better. If you keep trying to force what God has already released, you will exhaust yourself spiritually and emotionally. Growth requires surrender. It requires trusting that God sees what you cannot yet see. As you move into the future, you will begin to notice that peace follows alignment. Even when change feels uncomfortable, there will be a quiet assurance in your spirit that you are moving in the right direction. Peace does not always mean easy, but it does mean ordered. When you align with God's purpose for your life, you stop chasing validation from the wrong places. You stop shrinking yourself to fit where you no longer belong. You stop apologizing for evolving. You begin to understand that growth is not betrayal. It is obedience to the call on your life. There will always be a temptation to turn back when the journey becomes uncertain. The enemy loves to use nostalgia to keep you stuck. He will remind you of how comfortable you once were, how familiar things used to feel, how safe it seemed when you weren't stretching. But comfort without growth becomes captivity. You were created to expand, transform, and rise into everything God has called you to be. And that means trusting him enough to walk away from anything that no longer aligns with his purpose for your life, even when it feels unfamiliar, even when it feels risky, even when it requires you to step into the unknown, believing that what God has ahead of you is greater than what you are leaving behind. God's timing is intentional, not delayed. There are moments in life when you feel like you're behind schedule, like everyone else is moving forward while you're still standing in the same place. You look at your prayers, your effort, your hopes, and you wonder why things haven't shifted yet, you start to question whether you missed your moment or whether God has forgotten you. But what you call delay, God often calls development. His timing is not careless. It is crafted with purpose, precision, and love. Every season you walk through is shaping you for what he has prepared, even when you cannot see it yet. We live in a world that celebrates instant results, fast progress, immediate answers. So when God moves slowly, it can feel frustrating. But there is a difference between delayed and deliberate. God is not operating on your clock. He is working according to his plan, and his plan includes preparation. There are blessings that require maturity before you receive them. There are opportunities that require character before you can sustain them. There are rooms you are called to enter, but God is still building the emotional, spiritual, and mental foundation you will need to thrive once you get there. Sometimes the waiting season exposes what you truly believe about God. Do you trust him only when he moves quickly, or do you trust him because he is faithful? Waiting tests your posture. It reveals whether your faith is rooted in outcomes or in relationship. When it feels like nothing is happening, God is often doing his deepest work beneath the surface. He is stretching your faith, refining your motives, and aligning your heart with his will. He is teaching you patience, surrender, and dependence. These qualities may not feel exciting, but they are essential for destiny. Think about the times you wanted something to happen sooner. At the moment, it seemed like the right thing, the right opportunity, the right relationship, the right timing. But if you look back now, you may realize you weren't ready then. You didn't have the wisdom you have today. You didn't have the discernment, the strength, or the boundaries you've since developed. If God had opened that door too early, it might have overwhelmed you, distracted you, or even destroyed you. His timing isn't about withholding. It's about protecting and positioning you. There is also purpose in the pauses of life. When God slows you down, it's not always to deny you. Sometimes it's to redirect you. You may be praying for one thing while God is preparing something better that you haven't even imagined yet. You see the moment. God sees the whole story. You see the step. God sees the path. And because he loves you, he will not allow you to settle for something small when he has something greater prepared. The silence of God does not equal the absence of God. He is working even when you cannot trace his hand. Waiting on God's timing also reshapes your identity. It teaches you that your worth is not measured by how fast you achieve something or how quickly your prayers are answered. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not forgotten. You are being prepared in ways that only God fully understands. There will come a moment when everything he has been building within you aligns with the opportunity he has prepared for you. And when that moment arrives, it will make sense why it had to take the time it did. In these seasons, comparison becomes one of your greatest enemies. When you look at others and measure your journey against theirs, you forget that every story is written differently. What God does quickly for someone else, he may do slowly for you, not because you are less loved, but because your calling requires deeper roots. You don't know the sacrifices, struggles, or processes behind what you see in other people's lives. Stay focused on your lane. God is writing a testimony in you that will be worth the wait. There will be moments when your flesh grows restless. You may feel impatient, discouraged, or wary. You may want to force outcomes, rush decisions, or make things happen in your own strength. But anything built outside of God's timing comes with unnecessary burden. When God orchestrates it, he also equips you to carry it. His timing carries grace. His timing carries peace. His timing carries alignment. You won't have to manipulate, beg, or strive. Things will begin to fall into place in a way that only he could arrange. So when the clock seems to move slowly and the journey feels long, remind yourself that God is not late. He is strategic. He is intentional. He is weaving every moment, every delay, every closed door, and every quiet season into a greater purpose. What feels like waiting is often God building the version of you that can walk confidently into the promise without crumbling under the weight of it. Trust that his timing is not working against you. It is working for you, shaping you, maturing you, and aligning you with what he has already ordained for your life. When God leads, he also provides strength for the journey. There are seasons when the path God calls you to walk doesn't look easy, predictable, or comfortable. Sometimes it feels like you're being stretched beyond what you thought you could handle. You may feel unqualified, underprepared, or emotionally exhausted. Yet somehow, even in the middle of the struggle, there's a grace that keeps you moving. That grace is the strength God supplies. He doesn't call you and then abandon you. He doesn't send you forward and leave you empty. When God leads you into a new season, He equips you for everything connected to it. Strength from God doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it shows up as peace when everything around you feels chaotic. Sometimes it shows up as clarity in moments of confusion. Sometimes it shows up as resilience, this quiet determination in your spirit that refuses to quit even when quitting seems easier. You may still feel tired. You may still feel stretched, but there is something inside you that keeps saying, keep going. That is not just willpower. That is God sustaining you from within. There will be days when you wake up and wonder how you're going to make it through. Maybe the responsibilities feel heavy. Maybe the healing process feels slow. Maybe the journey feels lonely. And in those moments, you realize that your own strength has limits. Your own resolve can only take you so far. But God's strength is not limited by your capacity. His strength doesn't run out. When you reach the end of yourself, you discover the beginning of His power working in your life. Sometimes God allows you to feel weak on purpose, not to break you, but to teach you dependence. If you could carry everything on your own, you would forget who is truly sustaining you. When your strength fades, you start leaning on Him more intentionally. You pray differently. You listen more closely. You stop pretending you have everything under control and start inviting God into places you once tried to manage alone. It is in those vulnerable spaces that His strength becomes most evident. God's strength also shows up through people, resources, wisdom, and unexpected provision. You may receive encouragement at the exact moment you felt like giving up. A door may open when you thought every opportunity had closed. A strategy may appear in your mind that you never would have seen without God's guidance. Strength is not always physical or emotional. Sometimes it is divine support wrapped in practical help. God is intentional about ensuring you have what you need to complete what He has assigned to you. When God leads you, the journey may involve challenges, but it will never involve abandonment. You may cry along the way. You may question things along the way. You may even stumble, but every time you think you can't recover, somehow you rise again. That is evidence that God is still breathing life into your purpose. If the journey were meant to destroy you, it would have succeeded by now. The fact that you're still pressing forward, still believing, still showing up, is proof that God is strengthening you beyond what you can fully understand. There may also be moments when God strengthens you by refining you. He develops discipline, endurance, faith, and emotional maturity through the trials you face. Strength isn't only about pushing through. It's also about becoming grounded, rooted, unshaken by what once would have broken you. Over time, you start to notice that the things that used to overwhelm you no longer have the same power. That's not because the problems disappeared. It's because God fortified your spirit. When you follow God's leading, you don't have to fear running out of what you need. You don't have to second guess whether you're capable enough or strong enough. Your role is obedience. God's role is empowerment. He will meet you in every place your humanity falls short. And every time He strengthens you, your trust in Him grows deeper. You begin to realize that the journey is not about showcasing your strength, but about revealing His. So even when the road feels long, even when the weight feels heavy, you can walk with confidence knowing that you are not carrying it alone. You were never meant to. God is present in every step, every challenge, every transition, and every leap of faith. And as long as He is the one leading, you can be certain that He will continue to supply the strength, courage, grace, and resilience you need to keep moving forward one step at a time. Your faith must become greater than your fear. Fear has a way of whispering worst-case scenarios into your mind. It magnifies uncertainty, exaggerates risk, and convinces you that safety is found in staying still. Fear builds walls around your potential and labels them as protection. It tells you that trust is dangerous, vulnerability is risky, and stepping out in faith is too costly. But faith speaks another language. Faith looks at the same uncertainty and says, God is already there. Faith doesn't deny that fear exists, but it refuses to bow to it. It refuses to let fear dictate your decisions or determine your destiny. There are moments when God calls you into places that your fear tells you to avoid. Maybe it's a new assignment, a conversation you've been avoiding, a dream you've been burying, or a step that feels far bigger than your current capacity. Your fear points to your limitations. Faith points to God's power. Fear makes you hyper aware of everything that could go wrong. Faith reminds you that God has been faithful every time you thought you wouldn't make it. When your faith grows stronger than your fear, your perspective shifts. You stop asking, what if I fail? And you start asking, what if God moves like he always has? Many people wait for fear to disappear before they move forward. But courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is movement in spite of it. Your faith activates not when you feel fearless, but when you choose to trust God, even though your emotions are screaming for you to retreat. Every step you take in faith weakens the grip fear has over your life. You begin to build a history with God, a collection of moments where you trusted him and he proved himself faithful. Those memories become anchors. They remind you that if God carried you through before, he is more than able to carry you through again. Fear also thrives in uncertainty and lack of control. It feeds on the unknown, but faith shifts your focus from control to surrender. It reminds you that God's sovereignty is greater than your strategy. You don't need to have every detail figured out to move forward. You don't need to see the full plan before taking the first step. All you need is the assurance that God is who he says he is. Fear says you're not enough. Faith says God is more than enough. And when you root your confidence in him rather than yourself, your faith gains strength and depth. There will be times when fear disguises itself as wisdom. It will sound rational, logical, and safe. But you must discern the difference between God-given caution and fear-driven paralysis. Caution guides you. Fear cages you. Caution prepares you. Fear prevents you. When God is calling you forward, he will give you peace even if the path feels unfamiliar. That peace becomes your confirmation. It doesn't erase every question, but it steadies your heart enough to keep moving. Your environment also influences your faith or your fear. Surrounding yourself with voices that constantly speak doubt, negativity, or limitation can weaken your belief in what God is capable of doing through you. But when you position yourself around people who speak life, truth, and faith, your spirit becomes strengthened. Their testimonies remind you that God is still working miracles, still opening doors, still making a way in impossible situations. Faith grows in the presence of faith. Fear grows in the presence of fear. Be intentional about which atmosphere you choose to stay in. Fear has a way of shrinking your dreams to the size of your comfort zone. It convinces you to settle for less than what God has promised. But when your faith becomes greater than your fear, you begin to dream again. You start to believe that God can restore, elevate, heal, and transform. You begin to see obstacles as opportunities for God to reveal his power. You stop minimizing what God placed inside you. You stop apologizing for obeying his voice. You begin walking with a quiet boldness, not because you trust yourself more, but because you trust him completely. Sometimes faith requires you to confront the very things you've been running from: old wounds, unresolved emotions, patterns that keep you stuck. Fear tells you to avoid those places. Faith tells you that God can meet you there and heal you. Faith invites you into freedom. It invites you into a life that isn't governed by anxiety, what ifs, or constant self-doubt. It invites you to live with expectancy rather than dread. And as your faith grows, fear loses its authority. So when fear rises up and tries to dictate your choices, remind yourself of who God is and what he has already done in your life. Let your faith answer the questions your fear keeps asking. Let your trust in God speak louder than your insecurities. When your faith becomes greater than your fear, you no longer live confined by what scares you. You live guided by what God has promised, moving forward with courage, conviction, and confidence in the one who holds your future. Obedience opens doors that effort alone never could. There are things in life you can achieve through hard work, strategy, discipline, and determination. Those qualities matter. They shape character and build resilience. But there are also dimensions of blessing, favor, clarity, and breakthrough that cannot be accessed through human effort alone. They are unlocked through obedience. Obedience is not about perfection, it is about alignment. It is the posture of saying yes to God, even when the instruction stretches you, challenges you, or moves you beyond what feels comfortable. When your heart is yielded, your life becomes positioned for what only God can do. Obedience requires trust because God doesn't always explain the why before he asks for the yes. He may call you to release something that seems valuable. He may nudge you to walk away from a situation that has become familiar. He may ask you to forgive when your emotions want to stay bitter or to step into an assignment you don't feel prepared for. Obedience invites you to trust his wisdom above your understanding. It reminds you that God sees the full picture while you only see fragments. When you obey, you are declaring that his perspective is greater than your own. There will be times when obedience feels inconvenient. It may interrupt your plans, shift your expectations, or require sacrifice. It may cost you relationships, comfort, or control. But what obedience costs in the short term, it returns in transformation and alignment. God honors a surrendered heart. He doesn't ignore the tears you cry while trusting him. He doesn't overlook the internal battles you fight while choosing faith over fear. Every yes you give him becomes a seed planted in the soil of your destiny, and in due time, those seeds produce fruit. Effort without obedience can lead to exhaustion. You can work tirelessly trying to make things happen in your own strength, striving, pushing, forcing, and still feel like you're running in circles. But when you move in obedience, there is a grace that accompanies your effort. Doors open that you couldn't have unlocked on your own. Opportunities find you instead of you chasing them. Favor begins to flow in ways that don't make logical sense. It's not because you stopped working. It's because your work became aligned with God's will rather than resisting it. Obedience also refines your character. It teaches humility, patience, and discipline. It reminds you that following God is not always about convenience, but about commitment. Every time you choose obedience over comfort, you are training your spirit to follow God's voice more clearly. Over time, his guidance becomes easier to recognize because your heart is more surrendered. You begin to understand that obedience is not a burden, it's a privilege. It is an invitation to participate in what God is doing in and through your life. There may be moments when obedience doesn't appear to produce immediate results. You may wonder whether your sacrifice even mattered. You may question whether your yes actually changed anything. But obedience is not always about instant outcomes. Sometimes it is about long-term positioning. God may be using your obedience to open a door that you won't even recognize until months or years later. He may be protecting you from something you never knew was coming. He may be preparing a blessing that requires your heart to be in the right place before you receive it. Obedience and intimacy with God are deeply connected. The more you obey, the closer you feel to him. You become more aware of his presence, more sensitive to his leading, and more confident in his character.